Good evening. Great to be learning with you on a Wednesday, Yom Revi'i. Let's light up the darkness. I'll tell you, it's been hard to focus today. Thank God, we live in an area that is between 5 and 10 miles away from the various fires that are closest. But I mean, the sky was overcast when there were no clouds in the sky. There was just a layer of ash above our heads. Terrible air. Whatever, not such a big deal for us, but for people that have real breathing problems, very bad. I do know people personally who have lost their homes. Awful. It's ongoing, this problem. It's really terrible. And so once again, I'd like to dedicate our learning tonight for the strength and comfort and safety of everyone in harm's way where those fires are raging, the responders who are rushing to the danger. May they all be safe. And we say Amen. Who's in the house? Stephen in New Hampshire, Paul in the Great Northwest, Yehud in South Carolina, Yosef in New Jersey, Guy in Ohio, Melissa in Great Neck, Bella in Florida, Shandora in the Bronx, Joe in the Inland Empire, Lorraine in Texas, Gail in Kansas City, Lucy in Minnesota. And people are saying Amen. Thank you. And Chaim in Florida, Spencer in Connecticut, Marie in Freeport, Alan in New York City, Aoife in Florida, Ella in Southern California, Moshe in Las Vegas. Welcome, everybody. Let's get to it. It's another dramatic, amazing daf. Not a short one. So let's get busy. Okay, so we're picking this up right near the bottom of page 21b. Our daf tonight is page 22 here in Tractate Sanhedrin, the 24th volume of the Talmud. Continuing our discussion of Mishnah number 5 here in chapter 2. Marzutra said yesterday, at the end of yesterday, we've been talking about rights and especially responsibilities and requirements of a king of the Jewish people when we had kings, and perhaps we will again when Mashiach comes. And so some of these, one of the things that we talked about at the end of yesterday was that a king must write a Torah scroll. In fact, some say he must write 2 Torah scrolls, one to take with him everywhere he goes, and one to keep in his treasury, but that a king must be mindful at all times why he is the king. In other words, he was appointed by God for the service of the Jewish people, not just to exercise power and privilege and prestige for himself. Marzutra says, and some say that it is Mar Ukva who says, initially the Torah was given to the Jewish people in ivrit script. Now that we're talking about writing a Torah scroll, we're going to talk about the difference between the original ivrit script and the later ashurit script, which is what we are familiar with. So if you see here, you see the Hebrew letters that look familiar. That's the ashurit script, which according to some opinions was a later development. And then you see the original script next to it, same letters, but written in a different way, some of which are pretty unrecognizable to us. And that was the original script, according to some opinions, that, for example, the 10 Commandments were written in. I actually have a picture of myself holding the stone tablets that were used in the Cecil B. DeMille production of the 10 Commandments. They're held in deep storage at Cedars-Sinai Hospital, but Rabbi Jason Weiner, the chaplain over there, once had a special program, and they were brought out, and I was able to get a picture of me holding them. They were really heavy. They don't resemble what the real tablets look like, according to Chazal, according to our sages, which were much larger, much thicker, totally not. I mean, these things weighed like 50 pounds each, and okay, I'm a relatively strong guy. I could hold them up. But the tablets, as the sages envisioned them elsewhere in the Talmud, were so big and thick and heavy, and plus miraculously, like where there was a final mem, which is a closed letter, so the center of it would have to float in that space since they were carved all the way through, and the thickness of the tablets was like this. So that's for another day. The point is that those letters are understood to be these ivrit type of letters that we no longer use. So why did they change? Why did the Hebrew letters change in history to a nearly unrecognizable script? And by the way, here there are some signs in Israel there where the Samaritans, where they live, they still use that script. So you see the Hebrew, the English, and then that original ivrit script. So why did that change? Let's read more. So Mar Ukva says, initially the Torah was given to the Jewish people in ivrit script, the original form of the written language, and the sacred tongue, Hebrew. And it was given to them again in the days of Ezra. These were the returnees from the Babylonian exile led by Ezra the scribe at the beginning of the Second Temple period. And that's when the script changed from the old one to the new one. It was given to them again in the days of Ezra in ashurit script and in the Aramaic tongue. And the Jewish people selected ashurit script and the sacred tongue of Hebrew for the Torah scroll, and they left the ivrit script and the Aramaic tongue for the commoners. So the Gemara asks, who are the commoners? And Rav Chisda said the Samaritans, also known as the Kutim. So that was in the First Temple period when the Assyrians defeated the northern kingdom, the rebellious kingdom, the unauthorized kingdom. And then the 10 tribes went out into the Assyrian exile. And then what did they do? They brought other people in to replace the ones that had been moved around. We saw Joseph do this in last week's Torah portion in Egypt. This was a way of asserting control over a population, that when you take control of a land, you move people around from one city to another, you disperse them, so that they're all sort of exiles within their own land, making a life in new places and more dependent on and more subject to the central government. So the Assyrians did that. They moved the Jews of those 10 tribes out of the Holy Land, and they moved these people, the Samaritans, into the Holy Land. These people were not Jews, but once they were living in the land of Israel, they started to come under pressure from natural phenomena like attacks by wild beasts, and they felt like, oh, well, in this land you have to follow the Torah. So they started adopting a bunch of the mitzvahs, the commandments that are written in the Torah for themselves, but they didn't really convert to Judaism. They never fully became Jews. And so there was always a need to distinguish the Jews from these people who took on some Jewish practices, but not others. Okay, so what they're saying is, who are these commoners? And Rav Chisda says the Samaritans. And what is the ivrit script? Rav Chisda says the Libonaa script, another name for it. So it is taught in a baraisa that Rabbi Yosef says, Ezra was suitable, given his greatness, for the Torah to be given by him to the Jewish people, had Moses not come first and received the Torah already. Well, Ezra's achievement, right, in getting these people to leave this cushy life that they had built for themselves in Bavel, which by then was the Persian Empire, was an astonishing feat. A lot of these Jews had intermarried. They had to leave their non-Jewish wives and come back to the Holy Land, where everything had been destroyed and they had to start from scratch. It was a very, very difficult life. And yet Ezra was able to motivate over 50,000 people to do that and to start rebuilding the Second Temple. Let's go back to, so Ezra was at such a level that he could be compared to Moses. Now, with regard to Moses, the verse states, and Moses went up to God in Exodus 19:3. And with regard to Ezra, the verse states, this Ezra went up from Bavel from Babylon, and he was a ready scribe in the Torah of Moses, which the Lord, the God of Israel, had given. That's Ezra 7:6. So just as the going up stated here with regard to Moses is for the Torah, which he received from God and transmitted to the Jewish people, so too the going up stated there with regard to Ezra is for the Torah, as he taught Torah to the Jewish people and was suitable to have originally merited to give it. He would have been a person of the stature and merit to have received the Torah like Moses, right? It's an astonishing comparison. So the Baraisa continues, with regard to Moses, the verse states, and the Lord commanded me at that time to teach you statutes and ordinances, Deuteronomy 4:14. And with regard to Ezra, the verse states, for Ezra had set his heart to seek the Torah of the Lord his God, and to do it and to teach in Israel statutes and ordinances, Ezra 7:10. And even though the Torah was not given literally by him, the script of the Torah was changed by him, as it is stated. Now note, no letters were changed, no words were changed, just the form of the letters was changed. An aleph was still an aleph, a base was still a base, a gimel was still a gimel, a dalet was still a dalet. But the script was a little bit different. It was changed by him, as it is stated. Now we're on page 22a. And the writing of the letter, Hanishtavan, was written in the Aramaic script and set forth in the Aramaic tongue, Ezra 4:7. So the term Hanishtavan is similar to the word nishtana, like manishtana, meaning changed. Like, how is this night different from all other nights? This is alluding to the fact that the script had been changed. And it is written with regard to the writing on the wall that we're going to be talking about tonight of Belshazzar's palace. Then came in all the king's wise men, but they could not read the writing, nor make known to the king the interpretation. That's from Daniel 5:8. And the reason they could not read it is that it was written in the new script that Ezra would transmit. And it is written that he shall write for himself a second Torah. Here, second is translating the word Mishna, which also means repetition. Deuteronomy 17:18, where Mishna teaches that it is written in a script that is apt to be changed, lehishtanot. So the Baraisa continues, why is this script called ashurit? Because it is ascended with the Jewish people from Ashur, the place Ashur, when they returned from their exile in Babel. Now it is taught in a Baraisa, in the Tosefta 4:5, yet Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, Rebbe, says initially the Torah was given to the Jewish people in this script, Ashurit, which is in use today. Once the Jewish people sinned, it turned into an impairment for them, and they began writing with a different script, the ivrit script, also known as Lebona. And once they repented, the first script was returned to them, and they resumed writing with the Ashurit script. So according to Rebbe, the Hebrew that we use today was also the Hebrew of the Ten Commandments, but when the level of the people fell and eventually the first temple was destroyed, they lost the right to use that. That's why that other script was used, and then it was restored when they came back. As it is stated, quote, return to the stronghold, you prisoners of hope. Even today I do declare that I will render double, Mishna, unto you, Zechariah 9:12, meaning that God restored to the Jewish people this script that had been changed, Nishtana. Now the Baraisa continues, if this script predates the exile to Babel, why is it called Ashurit? You're saying it's called Ashurit because it's from Ashur, but now you're saying that it goes all the way back to the Ten Commandments, so why does it have that name? So different derivation, because it is me'usheret, beautiful and straight in script. And the Baraisa continues, Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar says in the name of Rabbi Eliezer ben Parata, who said in the name of Rabbi Elazar Hamodai, this script did not change at all, as it is stated with regard to the construction of the Mishkan, the tabernacle in the wilderness, the hooks of the poles, And the hooks are here called vave, the hooks of vave, right? So the letter vav, which we also put at the beginning of a word to say and what follows, the letter vav is just kind of a little line and then a straight line down, and that resembles a hook. So these were called the hooks of the poles, vave. And this teaches that just as the poles were not changed in the Mishkan, so too the hooks, the vavim, were not changed. The letter vav in ashurit script has the shape of a hook. So evidently this is why the term for hook in the Torah is vav. And the verse states, and to the Jews according to their script and according to their language. That's Esther 8:9, where it said that Esther and Mordecai sent letters out to the Jews throughout the Persian kingdom, Persian Empire, according to their script and according to their language. And this teaches that just as their language was not changed over the generations, but remained Hebrew, so too their script was not changed. So why would you say it changed? Right? The story in the book of Esther, the Megillah, that we recite at Purim, all of that happened during the period of the Babylonian exile between the first and second temple. Now, the Baraisa continues, but if the script was in fact not changed, how do I realize the meaning of the phrase, a second Torah? Mishna Torah meaning a second Torah. In Deuteronomy 17:18. And this serves to teach the law concerning the two Torah scrolls that the king writes. One that goes out and comes in with him, and one that is placed in his treasury. And with regard to the one that goes out and comes in with him, he makes it very small, like an amulet, and he hangs it on his arm. As it is stated by King David, I have set the Lord always before me. He is at my right hand, that I shall not be moved. And this verse alludes to the two Torah scrolls, one that is before him and one that is in his right hand. Now, the Gemara asks, with regard to the other sage, i.e. Rebbe, who does not hold that the king must write and affix the second scroll to his arm, what does he expound from that verse, I have set, in Psalms 16:8? And the Gemara responds, he requires that verse in accordance with the statement of Rav Chana bar Bizna. As Rav Chana bar Bizna says, that Rabbi Shimon Chasida says, one who prays needs to see himself as if the divine presence is opposite him. As it is stated, Psalm 16 verse 8, Shivisi Hashem lenegdi tamid. I have set the Lord always before me. This is a very important teaching. And this is not just for a king who has to feel that he's always in the presence of God, but we have to remember that. Most especially we have to remember that when we're addressing God, when we're praying, or when we're saying a blessing and we're saying Baruch Atah Hashem, right? We're saying blessed are you, God. If we just say those words in a meaningless way, blah, 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 it's ridiculous. We're talking to God, and God is everywhere. So every time we talk to God, we've got to take a pause and say, oh my gosh, I'm going to talk to the King of Kings, the King of the world. If you got to meet an earthly king, you'd be blown away. You'd think about it for weeks beforehand. What am I going to wear? What am I going to say? How am I going to walk? Who am I going to be with? Where am I going to stand? And then when you're in the presence of an earthly king, you'd be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm meeting a king. Wow. How much more the King of Kings? And yet, we talk to God all the time, blah, 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 right? So we have to be serious, and we have to know, and we have to set the Lord before us. In other words, set the scene for ourselves and understand and realize that we're talking to God. And make that real for ourselves, and all the more so when we're praying. So the Gemara asks, according to Rabbi Shimon, who says that this script was not changed at all, what is the reason that they could not read the writing in Daniel 5:8? So let's just review that story because it's amazing. So who destroyed the first temple? Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar's army, the Babylonian army, came in, destroyed the first temple, and they stole or plundered all of the vessels, the gold vessels used by the priests for bringing libations and, eating and drinking, but really for bringing libations to the altar. And they took it to the capital in Babylonia, in Babel, and just made it a possession, a plunder of King Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar, at a certain point, was so filled with pride in himself and his accomplishments that just sort of bragged, I, Nebuchadnezzar, am so mighty and awesome. And then immediately God struck him with madness. And he was just like running around the countryside, rolling in the dung and the dirt like an animal and eating grass. And at a certain point, he realized that it was his hubris that had brought him to that. And he actually repented and came back. You would think that his son, Belshazzar, might have learned a lesson from that, but he didn't. And so when he becomes king, now he's still right. So Nebuchadnezzar was the king of the Babylonian Empire, and now his son Belshazzar inherits that empire. And here at Daniel chapter 5, we pick this up. Well, just to summarize a little bit, the king made a great banquet for 1,000 nobles. And he was drinking wine, facing those 1,000. And under the wine's influence, Belshazzar gave orders to bring the vessels of gold and silver, which his father Nebuchadnezzar had removed from the holy temple in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, his wives and his concubines, might use them to drink at the party. They brought out the vessels. And in his hubris, right, to use such holy things to party with, they drank wine, toasted their gods of gold and silver, of bronze, iron, wood, and stone, and then the fingers of a human hand emerged and were writing across from the candelabra on the plastered wall of the king's palace. The candelabra, presumably the menorah. And this hand, or these fingers, were writing with a pen, like just, disembodied fingers, some kind of a miracle, and wrote words on the wall opposite where the king stood. And writing across from the menorah on the plastered wall of the king's palace, such that the king could see the back of the hand that was writing. And then the king's face blanched, and his thoughts frightened him, and the joints of his loins loosened, and his knees knocked against himself. I mean, he pooped himself. And the king cried out loudly to bring the soothsayers, the Chaldeans, and the astrologers. And he asked everybody and every wise man in the kingdom to say, what do those words on the wall of my palace, on the wall of my party room, dining room, right, in front of my assembled 1,000 nobles? Now this writing miraculously appears on the wall, and no one could read it. The king could not read it, and none of the wise men in the empire could read it, not the astrologers, magicians, Chaldeans, nobody. And so then somebody who served Nebuchadnezzar says to Belshazzar, your father had a wise man who could, figure anything out like this. And his name was Daniel. And he was from the land, he was a Jew from the kingdom of Israel, who came here in the Babylonian exile, along with the plundered vessels from the holy temple. And you should bring him in because he could probably read it. And so Belshazzar, who had already made the offer because he was so freaked out by the miraculous writing that anyone who could read it, we're going to make you the number 3 guy in the whole empire. Sort of like what Pharaoh did for Joseph, Belshazzar promised to do for whoever could read the writing on the wall. Nobody could do it. They brought in Daniel, and he repeated the offer. I'll shower you with riches, power, glory, and make you the number 3 guy in the whole empire. And then Daniel responded and spoke before the king. Let your gifts remain yours, and give your presents to another. But I shall read the writing for the king, and I shall make its meaning known to him. Regarding you, O king, the Most High God gave sovereignty and greatness and honor and glory to Nebuchadnezzar, your father. And because of the greatness that God gave him, all nations, peoples, and speakers of all languages trembled in terror before him. And he would kill whomever he wished and let live whomever he wished. And he would exalt whomever he wished and debase whomever he wished. And when he became haughty and his inclination to act wickedly became powerful, he was deposed from his royal throne, and his honor was taken away, and he was driven from human society, and he was made like a beast, and his dwelling place was with wild asses, and he ate grass like cattle, and his body was drenched by the dew of the heavens, until he recognized the Most High God rules the kingdom of man, and that he appoints over whomever he wishes. And then he was able to come back. And yet you, Belshazzar, his son, have not humbled your own heart, even though you know all of this. And you exalted yourself above the Lord of the heavens, and you had the vessels of his house brought before you, and you and your nobles, your wives, and your concubines drank wine from them, and you toasted your gods of silver and gold, bronze, iron, wood, and stone, who cannot see and cannot hear and cannot know. And the God who holds your soul in his power and who owns all your paths, you did not honor. So there was sent from him the back of a hand, and this writing was inscribed. And this is the writing which was inscribed. And then Daniel reads it. And this is the source of the saying, the writing is on the wall. Right? When do you say that? When somebody is doomed, right? Like when you see that, oh, this person's downfall is for sure, you say, yeah, the writing's on the wall. And it comes from this moment. So Daniel says to Belshazzar, the writing says, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. And this is the interpretation of the message. Mene, God has counted your kingdom and brought it to completion. Tekel, you have been weighed in the scales and been found wanting. Peres, your kingdom has been divided and given to Media and Persia. This is the moment when the Babylonian Empire becomes the Persian Empire. And then Belshazzar gave an order. You'd think that when he was told that, yeah, you're doomed, your kingdom is doomed, your empire is doomed, maybe they would shoot the messenger. But no, Belshazzar knew immediately that what Daniel said was the truth, and he rewarded him. So then Belshazzar gave an order, and they robed Daniel in royal purple, and a chain of gold was placed on his neck, and they publicly declared that he would rule as third in power in the kingdom. And that very night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was killed. What an episode. Okay, so that's the writing on the wall. And the question is, why could no one read it? And now we're being told in the Gemara, because it was in the new script that people were not used to. Why couldn't they read it? So the Gemara asks, according to Rabbi Shimon, who says that this script had not changed at all. It was the original script. So what is the reason they couldn't read it? And Rav says, because it was written for them in the obscure code of gematria. So there's a kind of gematria. So first of all, gematria means that you make an equivalency. Every letter also is a number, right? So the first letter of the alphabet, Aleph, is 1. The second letter, Base, is 2. Gimel is 3. Dalet is 4, etc. So every word also has a numerical value. And sometimes you can compare the numerical values. When the numerical value of two words is the same numerical value, those two words have some kind of a relationship, and you can build interesting interpretations of the Torah that way. There's another method called atbash. And what that means is that you would exchange, you see here on the left side, on the right side, going down, Aleph, Beis, Gimel, Dalet, Hey. On the right side is the alphabet starting at the end of the alphabet, Tav, Shin, Resh, Kuf. So when you exchange the first letter in the alphabet with the last letter in the alphabet, Aleph with Tav, or the second letter with the second to last letter, Beis with Shin, then you can start to create new words and see what happens. And that's called atbash, exchange, atbash, interpretation. Very esoteric, but can lead to very interesting things. So, because it was written for them in this obscure code of atbash version of Gematria, Yud Tet Tav, Aleph Yud Dalet Kaf, right? This many, it was actually saying something in code. That's the idea. So what did Daniel explain to them? The letters stand for the terms Menet, Menet, Tekel, Ufarsin, and he then explained the meaning. Menet, God has numbered you. This is based on Mena, the days of your kingdom, and brought it to an end. Tekel, you are weighed, Tekilta, on the scale and found lacking. Parsin, your kingdom is divided, Perisat, and given to the Medes and the Persians. And Shmuel says the writing used the correct letters for those terms, but instead of being written in order, the four words, Mene, Mene, Tekel, Ufarsin, were written vertically and were therefore meant to be read from the top down. It read in the usual way. If read in the usual way from left to right, it would say Mamtos non kefai alarn. And Rabbi Yochanan says each word was written backward, so that read right to left, they spelled anim, leket, nisrapu. And Rav Ashi says they were written with the first two letters of each word reversed, nema, ketal, pursin. At any rate, nobody else could read it. Daniel could read it. They knew immediately that what he said was the truth, and his truth was borne out immediately, right? That night, this mightiest king of the mightiest empire in the world was killed, deposed, and that empire, was conquered by another empire. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 5 here in chapter 2 of Sanhedrin. Now Mishnah number 6. One may not ride on the king's horse, and one may not sit on his throne, and one may not use his scepter, and one may not see him when he is having his hair cut, nor when he is naked, nor when he is in the bathhouse. As it is stated, you shall set a king over you, Deuteronomy 17:15. And when you say you shall set a king over you, it doesn't just mean you shall have a king. It means that you shall set that king in honor above every one of his subjects. You shall have awe of the king so that it'll be a meaningful king, royalty, kingship. Meaning that you must ensure that his fear should be upon you. All of these actions would lessen one's fear and reverence for the king, right? You don't want to see a king naked. You don't want to use his stuff like you could use of somebody else's, because then you wouldn't have awe of the king. It would just be too human to you. That's the Mishnah. Gemara. Rav Yaakov says that Rabbi Yochanan says, Abishag the Shunammite was permitted to Solomon, but forbidden to Adonijah. When King David was very old, and he was just like so kind of decrepit and weak, and he couldn't get warm. He was just cold all the time. They found this kind of very young and beautiful nubile woman, who literally lie with him and just warm him up. And, try to, spark an interest in life for him, as it were. But he was so old, he liked her. He wasn't, having intercourse with her. But still, she lay with him in that sense, body to body. And what are they saying here? That she was permitted to Solomon because Solomon became a king. And she was not permitted to Adonijah, who was a son of David, but who never became king. He tried to. He wanted to usurp the throne for himself, but he failed. So she was permitted to Solomon because he was a king. And a king may use the scepter of a king. In other words, something or someone that had been, a close personal touch with the king is permitted to another king, but not to a mere person. So it's permitted to Solomon because he was a king, and a king may use the scepter of a king. Abishag's status was similar to the king's scepter, as she had been designated to serve King David. She was forbidden to Adonijah, as he was an ordinary person and not a king. The Gemara clarifies the story of Abishag. What is it? As it is written, now King David was old and stricken in years, and his servants said to him, let there be sought a young virgin, and let her lie in your bosom, that my Lord may get heat. 1 Kings chapter 1, verse 1. As it is written, so they sought for a beautiful maiden, and they found Abishag. And it is written, and the maiden was very beautiful, and she became a companion to the king and ministered to him. But the king did not know her. Abishag said to King David, marry me. And King David said to her, you are forbidden to me, as I already have 18 wives, the limit that we learned yesterday. Abishag said to him, when the thief is lacking what to steal, he makes himself like a man of peace. In other words, she was saying that since King David was physically unable to engage in intercourse, he devised an excuse not to marry her. King David said to his attendants, call Batsheva to me. And it is written, and Batsheva went into the king, into the chamber. And now the king was very old, and Abishag the Shunammite ministered to the king. And Rav Yehuda says that Rav says at that time Batsheba wiped herself with 13 cloths, corresponding to the number of words in the verse, and indicating that she engaged in intercourse with King David 13 times. Rav Shemin bar Abba says, come and see how severe a matter divorce is, as they rendered it permitted for King David to be secluded with Abishag without marrying her, but they did not render it permitted for him to divorce one of his wives to enable him to marry Abishag, right? He wasn't committing adultery because, first of all, a man could have multiple wives. He could have just married her, but we said a king can only have 18 wives. He could have more concubines, and a concubine, right, means no ketubah, and no kedushin, no marriage contract, and no betrothal. But he obeyed the law and didn't make her one of his wives. Rabbi Eliezer says concerning anyone who divorces his first wife, and so, right, why not? Why not just, he had 18 wives. How closely attached could he be to all of them? He could have just divorced one since he really liked Abishag. And this teaches you, the point is, that teaches you that divorce, I mean, listen, sometimes a divorce is necessary, but it should be the last resort. That's what we're learning here. So Rabbi Eliezer says, concerning anyone who divorces his first wife, even the altar sheds tears about him. As it is stated, and further, this you should do, cover the altar of the Lord with tears, with weeping and sighing, from his no longer showing regard to the offering, nor receiving it with goodwill from your hand. That's Malachi 2:13. And it is written, lest yet you say, why? You ask why? Because the Lord has been witness between you and the wife of your youth, against whom you have dealt treacherously, though she is your companion and the wife of your covenant. Now, metaphorically, he was saying that the Jews were married, right, to God, or married to the Torah. The God and the Torah are, the same in many ways. And so in our youth, when God rescued us from Egypt and gave us the Torah Mount Sinai, it was like a honeymoon. We were really in love with the Torah. And then later, the spiritual level, the people fell and they turned away and cheated on the wife, so to speak. Turned away from the wife of youth and, pursued gods of others. Terrible, terrible sin. So Rabbi Yochanan, and some say Rabbi Lazar, says a man's wife does not die unless his creditors ask him for money that he owes and he does not have it. As it is stated, if you do not have with what to pay, you should take away your bed from under you. Proverbs 22:27. And the bed mentioned in the verse alludes to one's wife. And Rabbi Yochanan says, for any man whose first wife dies, it is as if the temple were destroyed in his days. As it is stated, Son of man, behold, I take away from you the desire of your eyes with a stroke. Yet neither shall you make lamentation nor weep, neither shall your tears run down. That's Ezekiel 24:16. And it is written, so I spoke to the people in the morning, and in the evening my wife died. Ezekiel 24:18. And it is written, the continuation of the same passage, behold, I will profane my sanctuary, the pride of your power, the desire of your eyes. Illustrating that a man's wife is as precious to him as the holy temple is precious to the entire Jewish nation. What a loss when a man loses his wife. Rabbi Alexandri says, for any man whose wife dies in his days, the world is dark for him. As it is stated, the light shall be dark in his tent, and his lamp over him shall be put out. Since the word tent, that's from Job. Since the word tent is commonly employed as a metonym for wife. Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina says, his steps get shorter. As it is stated, the steps of his strength shall be constrained. Rabbi Bachu says, his counsel falls, as it is stated, and his own counsel shall cast him down. Rabbi Bar Chana says that Rabbi Yochanan says, very famous statement right here, it is as difficult to make a shidduch, it is as difficult to match a couple as the splitting of the Red Sea, right? It is as difficult to bring two people that were, to make a marriage, to make a match. That's as difficult as it is to part the Red Sea when the Jews come out, the children of Israel come out of Egypt. Very famous saying. People say all the time when somebody's single and they're looking for a shidduch for that person, well, it's not easy. As it is stated, quote, God makes the solitary dwell in a house. He brings out prisoners into prosperity. So do not read the verse as brings out prisoners, rather read it as like bringing out prisoners. So accordingly, the act described in the first clause of the verse, God's causing a solitary person to dwell in a house, i.e. to get married, is compared to the act described in the next clause of the verse, i.e. bringing out prisoners. And do not read the verse as into prosperity, bekasharot, rather read it as crying and singing, bechi veshirot, which alludes to the splitting of the Red Sea when there was both crying and singing. Now the Gemara asks, is that so, that it is this difficult to find a match? But doesn't Rav Yehuda say that Rav says 40 days before the formation of the fetus in the womb, a divine voice emerges and says, the daughter of so-and-so shall be the wife of so-and-so. So why should matching them be so difficult, since they are prepared for this from their birth? They're destined to meet each other, soulmates. And the Gemara responds, La kasha, this is not difficult. This latter statement about predestined matches is stated with regard to the first match. And that former statement about the difficulty of matchmaking is stated with regard to the second match. The first match is not so hard to make because they're destined to be together. Maybe they're not destined to stay together. And then, one is truly blessed. Maybe they have a starter marriage and then they find the soulmate. But it's not so easy to find that soulmate in a second match. So maybe that's where it's so difficult, like splitting the sea. It's possible. It's just not easy. Rav Shmuel Bar Nachman says, for everything that is lost, there is a substitute, except for one's wife from youth who dies. As it is stated, and a wife from youth, can she be rejected? Isaiah 54:6. Rav Yehuda taught Rav Yitzchak, his son, a man finds calmness of spirit only from his first wife. As it is stated, let your fountain be blessed and have joy with the wife of your youth. Proverbs 5:18. And Rav Yitzchak, his son, said to him, such as whom? And Rav Yehuda said to him, such as your mother. A nice compliment for who is such a wonderful wife? He's saying to his son, your mother. Now we're on page 22b. And the Gemara wonders, is that so? Was Rav Yehuda so happy with his wife? But didn't Rav Yehuda once read to Rav Yitzchak, his son, from the verse, and I find more bitter than death the woman whose heart is snares and nets. Ecclesiastes 7:26. And Rav Yitzchak said to his father, such as whom? And Rav Yehuda said to him, such as your mother. First he's saying, that she is a fountain of blessing and joy. And then he says that she is nothing but snares and nets. And he's making both descriptions about the same woman, his wife. And Rav Yehuda said to him, and the Gemara responds, well, this is not a contradiction. Granted, she is difficult and angry, but afterward she is conciliatory. And so she is both more bitter than death and a source of calmness and joy for him at different times. Rav Shmuel Bar Unya says in the name of Rav, a woman is raw material, like a vessel that has not been completed, and makes a covenant becoming truly connected only to the one who made her a vessel through her first act of intercourse. As it is stated, for your maker is your husband, the Lord of hosts is his name. Isaiah 54:5. And it is taught in a baraisa, a man dies only to his wife, i.e., it is primarily his wife who suffers the pain and sadness resulting from his death. Right? Nobody feels the death of a man more keenly than his wife. And a woman dies only to her husband. No one feels the death of a woman more keenly than her husband. A man dies only to his wife, as it is stated, and Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died in Ruth 1:3. And a woman dies only to her husband, as it is stated in Jacob's parting words to Joseph. And as for me, when I came from Padan, Rachel died on me. Right, this week's Torah portion. Genesis 48:7. Now, the Mishnah teaches one may not see the king when he is having his hair cut. And the sages taught in the Baraisa, a king has his hair cut every day. A high priest waits from Erev Shabbos to Erev Shabbos, so he gets his hair cut once a week. And an ordinary priest has his hair cut once every 30 days. And this would be far more frequent than the average person, right? A priest, very special. He gets his haircut once a month. High priest once a week. But a king, daily haircut, because he always has to look perfect. The Gemara explains, a king has his haircut every day. As it is stated, your eyes should see the king in his beauty. Isaiah 33:17. So his beauty must be tended to daily. A high priest waits from Erev Shabbos to Erev Shabbos, Friday afternoon to Friday afternoon. As Rav Shmuel Bar Nachman says, that Rabbi Yochanan says, since new priestly watches begin every week on Erev Shabbos, the high priest must have his hair cut in order to look his best when the new watch, the new set of priests arrive for the next week. And the Gemara continues its explanation of the Baraisa. An ordinary priest has his hair cut once every 30 days, as it is written with regard to the priests, they shall shave their heads, and long hair they shall not grow out. They shall trim only their heads. And derived by verbal analogy, long hair in this verse from long hair in the verse written with regard to the Nazir, the one who takes a vow not to partake of products of the grapevine. It is written here with regard to the priests, and long hair they shall not grow out. And it is written there with regard to the Nazir, long hair growing on his head. So just as there, the Nazir, his hair growth is at least 30 days, so too, here it is 30 days. And the priest must cut his hair before it is called long. And we also learn in a Mishna, Tractate Nazir, a term of Naziris of unspecified length is 30 days. So that's why regular priests get their hair cut every 30 days. The Gemara asks, and there in the verse about the Nazir, from where do we derive that 30 days is the minimum length of a term? And Rav Matana says, as the verse states, he shall be, yihiyeh, holy. He shall be holy. And the word yihiyeh has the gematria, numerical value of 30. Rav Papa said to Abaye, say that the priests should not grow their hair at all, but shave their heads instead. Abaye said to him, had it been written, they shall not grow long hair, it would be as you said. But now that it is written, and long hair, so it can be somewhat long hair, but they should not grow it out very long. They don't walk around with shaved heads. And the Gemara asks, if so, that the restriction on priests growing long hair is a mitzvah by Torah law and not just a regulation for its time. Now, too, after the destruction of the temple, priests should be required to have their hair cut every 30 days. And the Gemara says the prohibition against priests growing long hair is similar to the prohibition against their drinking wine. So just as with regard to wine, only at the time of their entering the temple is it forbidden to the priests, but when it is not the time of their entering the temple, like when they're not serving in the temple, which is most of the time, right? They only serve in the temple when the temple was standing for 2 weeks a year, normal schedule, plus holidays. And And the rest of the time they're not there, meaning they could drink wine when they're not serving. So in the rest of the year, it is permitted, or it is not forbidden. So too, with regard to those with long hair, at the time they enter the temple, growing their hair long is prohibited. But when it is not the time of their entering the temple, it is permitted. The Gemara challenges this comparison. And is wine permitted when it is not the time of their entering the temple? But isn't it taught in a baraisa that Rebbe says, I say that actually it is always prohibited for priests to drink wine, even since the destruction of the temple. But what can I do? As his repair is his ruin. Meaning that it is the same destruction of the temple that ruined and confused all priestly regulations, but it also improved the priest's lifestyle by enabling them to drink wine. And Abaye said, in accordance with whose opinion do priests drink wine nowadays? It is in accordance with the opinion of Rebbe. So the Gemara concludes by inference that if Rebbe is singled out as a lone opinion, then it must be that the majority of the rabbis prohibit priests from drinking wine even after the destruction of the temple. The Gemara responds there with regard to drinking wine, this is the reason for the prohibition. The temple will be speedily rebuilt, and we need a priest who is fit for the temple service, and if the priests drink wine, there are none. Right? When Mashiach comes, God will build a third temple like that. It won't be like a building project that will take years. It'll appear. God can make it happen instantly. And then we will need priests who are ready to serve. And if they drink that on a somewhat regular basis, we're not going to have priests who are ready to serve. Therefore, none of them may drink wine. The Gemara objects to this. If so, here too, with regard to growing hair long, I need a priest who is fit for performing the temple service as soon as the temple is rebuilt. And if the priests grow their hair long, there are none. So the Gemara responds, here it is possible for him to cut his hair and enter the temple immediately. He could, if he's drunk, he has to sober up. But if his hair is long, well, we could just cut it. No big deal. So the Gemara objects to that. There too. If you're saying that all it takes is to get his hair cut, well, with respect to being drunk, you could sober him up quickly. There too, it is possible for him to sleep a little and then go in. As Rav Acha says, walking the distance of a mil, which is like a kilometer, or sleeping even a minimal amount will dispel the effect of wine that one has drunk. And the Gemara responds, but wasn't it stated with regard to Rav Acha's statement that Rav Nachman says, that Rabba Bar Avu says, they taught that the wine's effect is dispelled in such a way only when he drank a quarter lug at most. But if he drank more than a quarter lug, all the more so that walking that distance disturbs him, and sleep makes him more drunk unless he sleeps for a long time. So if he has to sleep it off for 8 hours, we don't have priests who are ready when the temple suddenly appears. Rav Ashi said, the difference between drinking wine and growing hair is this. Concerning priests drunk on wine who desecrate the temple service when they perform it while intoxicated, the sages decreed about them not to drink even after the temple was destroyed. With regard to long-haired priests who do not desecrate the temple service by performing it with hair that is too long, the sages did not decree about them not to grow their hair long after the temple was destroyed. And the Gemara raised an objection to Rav Ashi's distinction from a baraisa. And these are they who are sentenced to death at the hands of heaven, not by an earthly court, but heaven will cause them to die prematurely. And who are they? Priests who enter the temple with long hair or drunk on wine. And the Gemara comments, granted, priests entering the temple drunk on wine are liable for death. As it is written, specifically in the Torah, drink no wine, nor strong drink, you, nor your sons with you, when you go into the tent of meeting, that you do not die. It shall be a statute forever throughout your generations. This is to Aaron and his sons, the Kohanim, the priests. But as for priests with long hair, from where do we derive that they are punished with death at the hand of heaven? And the Gemara answers, it is from the fact that priests drunk on wine were juxtaposed to those with long hair. It is written, they shall not shave their heads, and long hair they shall not grow out. And it is written in the next verse, neither shall any priest drink wine when they enter the inner court. So just as priests drunk on wine are liable to receive death at the hand of heaven, so too those with long hair are liable to receive death at the hand of heaven. And if so, from this very juxtaposition, one may learn that just as priests drunk on wine desecrate the temple service, so too those with long hair desecrate the temple service, which poses a difficulty for Rav Ashi's statement. And the Gemara acknowledges, yes, this poses a difficulty. So Ravina said to Rav Ashi, this law, until Ezekiel came and taught it, who said it? How can a law, a halacha, according to Torah law, be derived from the juxtaposition of verses in a later book in the Bible, in Ezekiel, right, which historically was much later, right, hundreds and hundreds of years, almost 1,000 years later than the Torah was given. So what after the Torah was given and the priests started to serve first in the tabernacle, and later in the holy temple, did they have this law or not? Obviously they didn't. If it was an important law about serving the temple, it couldn't be that the Jewish people waited to hear that law until the prophet Ezekiel came and gave it to them. So what's going on? So Rav Ashi responds, and according to your reasoning then, with regard to this statement that Rav Chisda says, that we did not learn this following matter from the Torah of Moses, our teacher, until Ezekiel came and taught it to us. Quote, no stranger, uncircumcised in heart and uncircumcised in flesh, shall enter into my sanctuary to serve me. Ezekiel 44:9. Until Ezekiel came and taught that, who said it? So rather, this law is learned as a tradition, and therefore it was observed for generations. And Ezekiel came and gave it support by writing it as a verse. It was a tradition that was already maintained by the Jewish people. When Ezekiel came, he said, yes, God is affirming that you have the correct tradition. And now it's actually written explicitly in the Bible. And here too, this law is learned as a tradition, and then Ezekiel came and gave it support by writing a verse that a priest having long hair can profane the divine service just like a priest who is drunk. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. So the Gemara comments, and when they learned this law, it was to teach that a priest who violates the restriction is liable to receive death at the hands of heaven. But the fact that it is considered desecration of the temple service is not learned as a tradition. And so the Gemara asks, what is the meaning of they shall trim only their heads in Ezekiel 44:20? And the sages taught in Baraisa like a lulianit haircut. And the Gemara asks, what is a lulianit haircut? And Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says a unique haircut. And the Gemara says, well, what is that like? And Rav Ashi says the hair is cut so that the head of the hair in this row is at the side of the bottom of that row. Sounds almost like cornrows, but what they're saying is that priests had a unique haircut, even if we can't quite picture it. And the sages asked Rebbe, what was the haircut of the high priest? And he said to them, go out and see the haircut of Ben Elasa, who was the son-in-law of Rebbe, and who sported this hairstyle, which was the correct hairstyle for a high priest. Now, Rebbe lived after the temple was destroyed. So this is all happening after the temple had been destroyed, but it was only a few generations after the destruction of the temple, so the knowledge was still preserved of what the high priest's haircut looked like, even though there hadn't been a high priest in a long time. And it is taught in a Baraisa that Rebbe says, not for nothing did Ben Elasa disperse his money on his haircuts, but in order to demonstrate on himself the haircut of the high priest, so that people learning these laws, which they could no longer see enacted, but still needed to be learned, just like we're learning them, they could at least see what that haircut looked like by looking at this Ben Elasa, the son-in-law of Rebbe, and how he wore his hair. And that concludes chapter 2 of Tractate Sanhedrin. We'll pick it up tomorrow, God willing, at the regular Thursday time, 6 p.m. Pacific, with chapter 3. We'll take a few questions. Line 11, thought. My dear friend, If Aramaic was for the commoners, why is the Talmud in Aramaic? Aramaic was the language of the day. So it's like the Talmud was written in English for us. And what they were distinguishing, Aramaic and Hebrew are very similar, but they reserved Lashon Kodesh, the holy tongue, the holy language, for Torah. And they didn't want to be using that language when they were, in the market buying pork bellies to fry up, the mundane affairs. Right? So Aramaic, which was similar to Hebrew, but not the same, was going to be the language, not just so much for commoners, all people spoke it. And that's why the Talmud was written in that language so that they could really sink their teeth into it. Though the Mishna was written in Hebrew, the Gemara was written in Aramaic. What was I just going to say? Oh, that this was a big debate, something that a lot of people in the Torah world really objected to. When the modern state of Israel was created and Hebrew became its official language for that reason, that the holy language was now going to be used for all kinds of mundane subjects, and people didn't like it, but, history just went that way. Good question. Jonathan, with regard to the script, I read Torah for my shul often, usually 1 or 2 aliyos per week. And sometimes there are things that are written wrong. Not wrong, but pronounced in a different way than written. Do we think Ezra made a mistake? No. I know that the Masorti pronunciation, the tikkun, is used regardless of the letters because we have a tradition. And in fact, we've mentioned this a few times, that there are words that are written one way, but everyone who lanes knows that they need to be pronounced another way. And that's how we do it. Right? Just like that joke, which I'm not going to tell because time is so short. But, the new rabbi who's concerned that when the Shema or the Kaddish is being done, whichever prayer you want to use for the joke, some people sit, some people stand, and they all yell at each other. The people sitting say everyone should sit, and the people who are standing say everyone should stand. And the rabbi goes to the oldest member of the congregation in a nursing home, and he says, on my first Shabbos, all these people were arguing with each other, and the sitting people wanted everyone to sit, and the standing people wanted everyone to stand. So what is the tradition of this show? And the old man says, yeah, that is our tradition, that they all yell at each other. So it's just one of those things. Why is it that way? Why were there some words, is what you're asking. Why are there some words that are written one way and that the tradition says we pronounce them another way? I don't think it's an error. I think it was meant to be that way. And the result is that because what we're saying is when a word is written one way and translated and pronounced another way, what we're saying is that both are words. It's not just that, we pronounce nonsense, nor is it written nonsense. So when we pronounce it a different way than it's written, what we're saying is we're saying one word instead of another. And because of that, we don't ignore the written meaning, but we have two meanings that are present, and that elevates us and, in fact, leads us to question and to learn Torah, by asking that question. Sharon, my understanding is that Aramaic is like Mama Lashon is for Yiddish. Wisdom, writing, and prayer, much of the Haggadah is also in Aramaic. Another good explanation. Lucy, I thought the court of the Babylonian king just did not know how to read Hebrew script because the Babylonians used a different script, a different language altogether, perhaps, but, they had just had these wars of conquest. They had people, around who would have been able to just read it. If all it was the language of one of the lands that was conquered by Nebuchadnezzar, they would have had somebody that could read it. So either it was coded or the script had changed and nobody recognized it at all. They couldn't see what the letters were. Yosef, what is the Greek version of the Tanakh, the Septuagint? Was the Greek version trusted among the sages? Yes and no. Right? There's a story that there was, a Greek king or emperor who, locked the members of the Sanhedrin, each of them individually, in a room by himself, and said, translate Tanakh, translate the Bible into Greek. And miraculously, all of them produced, working on their own, the same translation. And so definitely the first translation, the Greek translation, it has some authority because it's so old and because this story is associated with it. But just like when we read the Bible in English, we can get so much out of it, but we also miss so much. So as we start to learn Hebrew and we get better and better at Hebrew, even with my weak Hebrew, I can work my way word by word through a translation, and so many things come out from doing that. The way words are repeated, the way there's emphasis. I mean, the rhythm and structure of Hebrew is so different from English that no matter how good the translation is, something beautiful and essential is lost when translating. So whenever possible, work your way through it in Hebrew or with somebody who understands the Hebrew and can show you how the Hebrew works. Bill, a possible solution to priests needed when the third temple is miraculously built by God. Presumably this happens alongside or even after the general resurrection of the righteous. Surely the resurrected priests would be sober. That's a great thought. I would think so. Aaron will be there, right? I mean, Aaron's not going to be resurrected and, having just been in his cups. So that's a great observation. And Lionel, with no disrespect to some very holy rebbes that I know well, why is there such significant drinking of l'chaims? Many drinks of whiskey, etc., not just a drink or two. That's certainly not a universal practice, but in some streams, right, of traditional, what we now call Orthodox, although that's a very modern term, but just, very observant traditional rabbis in some streams of Judaism will get into their cups quite a bit. Not every day, not every day. But we have a saying in the Talmud that when wine goes in, secrets come out. And this has two meanings. On the one hand, people who get sloppy drunk are stupid. And, when they get drunk like that, they say way too much that they regret later. But people who can drink, for the purpose of bringing out, Torah insights that they might not have otherwise had, this is a respectable form of drinking. Who can, control themselves so carefully that their drinking would only be for that higher purpose is a good question. It's a good question. But that's certainly the intent. And you and I know each other well, and some of these rabbis that you're talking about, they do have an astonishing degree of control, where they can drink a lot and they don't get sloppy, right? And they are able to bring out some amazing insights. And I will also say, I'm not a drinker at all. My kids will say they've never seen me drunk. I like to get a buzz now and then. But I've just noticed that on Shabbos, like Friday night dinner, with a good conversation, lots of Torah going around the table, and before you know it, we've each drunk, a full glass of wine or maybe two, maybe more, like more than I would normally drink. And if I drank that much on any other day of the week, I would feel it much more strongly. But on Shabbos, it's like there is an enhanced capacity. You have to study yourself, and everybody's chemistry is different. I'm not saying other people should try this. But it is amazing to me that, in my personal experience, it seems like you can imbibe a little bit more on Shabbos with much less effect. Only positive effect, let's put it that way. That's what I've got for us tonight, and with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Thursday, regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. All the best, and please, God, protect the people in harm's way in these fires around LA. And we say, Amen.